This is the story of the assassination of a president and the call for reform that resulted. Now, who was the man who assassinated President Garfield? He was Charles Guiteau, a 40-year-old man who had suffered from mental illness throughout his life. Guiteau had always been fascinated by politics and the chance for advancement through political connections. He'd supported Garfield in the election of 1880 with the hope that he would be made an ambassador in Europe as a thank you for his support. Guiteau could only have gotten such an ambitious thought from the culture of corruption and spoils that had been created over many decades. Guiteau showed up to the White House several times during the opening months of the Garfield presidency, pestering his advisors to grant him an ambassadorship. At a time where anybody could walk into the executive mansion and seek an audience, this made Guiteau a dangerous figure. By eliminating Garfield, Guiteau hoped to make Vice President Chester Arthur the new man on top. He believed Arthur would give him the position he deserved. Unfortunately, there was some merit to Guiteau's belief that Arthur would be more kind to him than to Garfield. Arthur was a longtime colleague of Roscoe Conkling, a senator from New York, who was known as being the top Republican handing out political positions in exchange for support. Conkling had not supported Garfield because he knew that Garfield had some hopes of reforming the civil service requirements. These requirements determined who was eligible for federal jobs. Garfield had hoped to make it less of a way of handing out political favors and more of a meritocracy. The history of corruption and handing out jobs dated back to the Andrew Jackson presidency, where Old Hickory swept into the White House on a populist platform that promised to reward his followers. Since then, party leaders, both Republican and Democrat, had become highly influential in public policy while loading their own pockets in the process. The Gilded Age was a spectacular time for those looking to line their own pockets, as many politicians were. The era represented a time of mass inequality, where the rich held on to most of the money while poor people had less than ever. This heightened the tensions between the rich and the poor, and those looking to reform the way society operated sprang into action. One area of potential reform was civil service. People were tired of seeing jobs handed only to the friends and family of the rich instead of those who most deserved the work. By this time, the bureaucracy was rapidly expanding, so federal jobs were highly prized. Civil service reformers hoped that by making the hiring process more of a meritocracy, corruption would be rooted out and well-paying jobs would go to those who were the most worthy. So how did this relate to Charles Guiteau and James Garfield? Guiteau shot Garfield because he expected to be handed a job in exchange for his political support. Garfield opposed that system and wanted a more fair way for federal jobs to be handed out. The new president, Chester A. Arthur, initially disagreed with Garfield, as he himself had risen politically due to handouts from powerful friends like Roscoe Conkling. However, Arthur changed once he was in office. He was haunted by the words of Guiteau and had never expected he would actually be president. The culmination of Arthur's change of mind and the work of reformers throughout the country was the Pendleton Civil Service Act of 1883. Arthur happily signed this act into effect, and the bureaucracy became one where jobs could no longer be handed out as political favors. So remember that the assassination of James Garfield did directly relate to the issues of civil service and the making of the bureaucracy into a meritocracy.